So I was probably at the age of 10 when I had a real interest in food. And what really spiked my interest was the opportunity to travel with food. So mum and dad said to me, look, if your grades keep going the way they are, you're going to have to give up working. Some undesirable things that you're seeing back then, the chefs used to smoke while they cooked. They worked in thongs and shorts and T-shirts. And so, for a young kid entering the industry, it was just a bit of an eye-opener. Podium finish at the finals of the World Food Championships, 3 world titles, and to be their ambassador it's a nice way to finish. Look, I think my first big break was actually being in charge of my very first restaurant. Unfortunately, when I arrived, the reviews that they had in that restaurant weren't too favourable. So it was my job to turn it around. We had white aprons, from your waist right down to your ankles. If you spilt something on it, you had to go and get changed. So you could be getting changed half a dozen times a day. So you learn to work meticulously. Clean. Back then, the human resource component and the training that you were given back then, it was first class.
I saw that you had posted a box of knives with a small note on it that your grandpa gave it to you.
Yeah, he helped me on my way. He had a toolbox made for me, and the other day I came across those and still have them. And you can see the bow in the knife. It's been sharpened that much now. When you have that understanding to nurture and help people, the respect that you get it's enormous. What I love about food is it brings people together. Good, bad, or indifferent. There's always celebrations around food. There's commiserations about food. There's just something about the family meal that's quite humbling.
Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel and another episode from Passion to Profession, Chef's Edition. I'm your host Vaidehi, and today we have someone with not just any title but the title of World Food Champion. He has an experience of over 4 decades in this industry and a lot to share with us about it. Let's welcome the world champion, Chef John McFadden. Hello John, how are you?
Afternoon, very well, thank you. And you?
I'm good, thank you.
It's all right.
So before we start taking a route to your journey, could you share the exact moment when you decided that you wanted to become a chef?
Yeah, certainly. It started quite young, to be honest. I was probably at the age of 10 when I had a real interest in food. And what really spiked my interest was the opportunity to travel with food, understand different cuisines, cultures across the world. And I found that quite exciting. It's one of the few careers you could literally pick up and take anywhere.
So do you remember your first role in the professional kitchen?
My first role, it started early. I grew up on the Central Coast. My dad played golf with a gentleman that was a restaurant owner and operator. And at the age of 12, I had the opportunity to work in that restaurant. So first of all, it was just watching and observing. And before I knew it, I was washing pots and pans, and that was my entry into the kitchen. So, and that turned into pretty much a full-time job after school, 5 days a week. And I worked in that restaurant for 3 years up until I started an apprenticeship at the age of 15.
That's a long time.
Oh, it was cash. It was great. I loved it.
So you were studying and doing this?
Yeah, so I was at school. So years sort of 8, 9 and 10. What had happened was that my grades started to slip at school because I was doing a lot of night work after school, finishing at sort of 11 o'clock at night. So mum and dad said to me, look, if your grades keep going the way they are, you're going to have to give up working. So I had to find ways and means to pick my grades up, which I fortunately did. And when school finished in year 10, I had the opportunity of either going back to school or finding an apprenticeship, sort of in that 6-week school break. And I went everywhere on the Central Coast to find a job. And without a word of a lie, probably 30, 40 job interviews in that 6-week period. And I landed a job in a Chinese restaurant of all places, but it was a means and a way to start my apprenticeship.
So is this the same Chinese restaurant that you were telling me about earlier?
Yes, it is. Yeah,
what was the interesting part about it?
Look, sort of back then in the mid-80s, like working in the Chinese restaurant, it's at 500 people. And there was just some undesirable things that you're seeing back then. The chefs used to smoke while they cooked. They worked in thongs and shorts and T-shirts. And so, for a young kid entering the industry, it was just a bit of an eye-opener. So, but that was all experience building as well. And, there was some great food to learn out of that restaurant. what I enjoyed more so was it wasn't the westernized Chinese, but when we sat down and had dinner and supper, they did their traditional food fair. And that was some of the best food I've ever eaten, and we don't get exposed to that so much here because of the westernization of a lot of cuisines. But yeah, I had a whole new appreciation for Chinese food, just sitting down around the family table with them, sort of before we started service and after we finished service, we'd have supper.
Oh, and do you remember anything significant that you learned from that, like working in that restaurant or the workplace that you mentioned, like you worked there for 3 years while you were studying? So since those were your early years, we are quite naive at that time. So do you still remember something that you learned back then?
Yeah, look, I think what I learned very quickly was, funny enough, all the different sections that make up a kitchen. Like even when I first started, 12 and 13, someone worked on the main section, someone worked on the larder or the entree section, someone did desserts. And even when I started back then, I was doing all the petit fours, like all the little biscuits and the chocolates for desserts, after dinner. I learned fairly quickly in regards to sort of the section breakdown of a kitchen. And I found that quite interesting in the fact that, how many steps in that ladder that you need to not necessarily climb, but to be across just to run a restaurant on a day-to-day basis.
And I think it's lucky of you to experience it quite early in your days, right?
Yeah, look, and the thing was, even when I worked at the restaurant at Long Jetty there, it changed hands a couple of times, and I worked with a Polynesian chef called Joseph, and he was the main cook, and it was just him and I. And you sort of wonder back then, God, if you were sick, what would happen, But you really understand the term teamwork. We relied on each other to do what we needed to do. I think that was really good character building for me.
Yeah, I mean, smaller the team, the more things that you get to learn, I feel.
Yeah, without doubt, and you're forced to learn them.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? It's Joseph's English wasn't too fabulous, and there are things that you learn along the way to sort of navigate around. And I remember I went down the shops to. I had to buy eggs. They ended up coming back with honey. So there was clearly a communication breakdown somewhere, but got on my bike and rode down and came back, and he just looked at me. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. So yeah, it was a bit of a mix up between eggs and honey. So there you go.
And did you have any mentor or someone who influenced you in your early days?
Probably the mentoring. Look, there's a couple of people through my career. When I sort of moved on from the Chinese restaurant, I moved into a 5-star property, and I never really competed much in the chefing scene of things. And I had a guy who was actually the best man at my wedding, Rob. He came from Cables in Sydney, and we worked together. And he was pushing me to go into Salon Culinaire competitions. I'm like, not quite ready. But the long and the short of it is that he pushed me, and I actually did quite okay through those competitions. But if he didn't really push me outside of my comfort zone, it's probably something I wouldn't have done without being pushed. And then further on in my career, I worked for a gentleman at the A&A Hotel, which is now the Shangri-La, Andy Bantot. I worked under him as like a number 2, and he really opened my eyes up into sort of middle management of a kitchen, trying to give people autonomy, to be responsible, develop, to train, to nurture. And I found that put me in really good stead in further years in how to work with people and for people. I found those insights really valuable. And after I left Andy at the A&A, I went to the Hyatt Regency at King's Cross, and it was my first sous chef's role. And the opportunity I had there was, to run my own brigade, my own team, my own menu. And we went gangbusters there. And there was a lady called Carol Silveraja, and she was phenomenal. She came in, she liked my food style. She took me under her wing. And some of the lessons out of that is that to her, I was a nobody. Do you know what I mean? And the dining scene in King's Cross End was huge. Neil Perry still had Wok Pool up there. Darley Street Thai around the corner, and Christine Manfield was up there, Paramount, and it was all happening up there. And here's this famous lady that's taken me under her wing, and she took me over to New York, and we cooked at the James Beard Foundation, and I found those lessons in life really valuable, that it's about giving time to people. And, that really put me in great stead for my future career and people I've sort of mentored and brought up through the kitchen brigade and what have you. And, those people have been quite valuable to me in their own ways and rights to help shape who I am.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible to see that you have met so many good people through your journey and like they've mentored in their own particular way. In saying that, which was your first big break?
Look, I think my first big break was actually being in charge of my very first restaurant. Not owning it. I was working for a hotel group. It was an Asian bistro, interesting enough, having started off in a Chinese restaurant. But in between then, I worked on Hayman Island. I worked in the Oriental fine dining. So I had a really good grounding of, the requirements of the job. Unfortunately, when I arrived, the reviews that they had in that restaurant weren't too favourable. So it was my job to turn it around. We had a fairly good sized team. It was about 12 to 13 chefs in that brigade. I sat down with each of them and said to them why I'm here and what we need to achieve within the next 12 months. And, this is the way we're going to go about it. I worked 6 days a week, open to close, to help the team get on their way. And to be fair to the team, quite a few people moved on, quite a few people stayed. And we recruited, we nurtured. And by the end of the year, we won Best Hotel Dining Restaurant in Australia. We were in all the social pages of magazines and newspapers, and hence Carol picked me up. We went to New York. We cooked at the James Beard Foundation for New York Food Critics. So that for me was, it was a bit daunting at first because it was my very first opportunity to showcase what I could do. Having worked underneath Andy and sort of working under hotel brands, they're very brand specific in their standardization of things. But this restaurant had its own identity. Although it was under the hotel, it wasn't marketed under the Hyatt Regency. It was marketed as Zoo Bistro. So it had its own, entrance off the street that you could walk in. So there was quite a differentiation between the hotel and this restaurant. And we were doing some amazing numbers, and I had a really great team there, a mixture of guys and girls. And we had a great buddy system in the kitchen. So if someone phoned in sick, they came to me with the solution. I wasn't providing them the solution. And they bounced off each other, and the camaraderie was remarkable, right? And so I worked with that hotel group for quite a period of time. Unfortunately, they just had the management contract, the hotel. They didn't own the building. And then once that contract finished up, Millennium Copthorne that owned it, turned it into apartments, and then I moved on into a catering business. So it was great. That was probably my first good break to sort of, prove to myself that I'm capable of turning things around. And the team was fairly young, which was great. And a lot of those lessons and learnings, I guess, through Andy and others was paramount. And even alluding to what was talking about earlier, like when we came into the hotel world, after I finished in the Chinese restaurant, I worked at Peppers on Sea at Terrigal, and I worked in the fine dining restaurant there. And the hotels were heavily European dominated. So all the training that I had in those last few years, and even beyond that, when I went to Melbourne and worked at the Windsor Hotel, they were all Europeans. To see an Australian in the kitchen was really rare. So I went down to Melbourne. I worked in a two-hatted restaurant there, and the kitchen was just full of Europeans, French, Austrians, English. And I think that, it put me in really good stead from a training point of view as to the opportunities that came after.
Like, if you don't mind me asking, how old were you when you got your first big break?
Oh, golly gosh. So I started when I was 15.
Yeah.
I qualified at 19. It was a 4-year apprenticeship then. And when I qualified, I went to Melbourne.
Okay.
So I worked down in Melbourne for just under a year. Then I went to the Blue Mountains, and then I went to Hayman. Then I came to Sydney. So I'd probably say I was 24.
Okay.
When I had
That's
my
young.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But also I'd been qualified for 5 years.
Yeah.
And I'd done my 4-year apprenticeship. So it's 7 or 8 years before I actually had my first sous chef role as such. So
yeah, as you mentioned, you started when you were 15, got your first big break when you were 24, and then climbed up your ladder to become an executive chef. Can you elaborate this journey for us? Because it sounds quite dynamic and interesting.
Yeah, look, I've been very fortunate that with the roles that I've held over the years have been quite diverse. Having come up through sort of, the Chinese restaurant into 5-star properties. Back then, the human resource component and the training that you were given back then, it was first class. Like seriously, train the trainer, supervisor training. It was really advantageous for later on in life for me to understand all the mechanisms and methods of training people, whether it's verbal or physical. Everyone behaves very differently in that space. Taking that back into my learnings at the hotels, I stepped out of hotels and then I worked for catering companies. So that was off-site, up to 5,000 people, never done it before, but it was the challenge that was ahead of me. And I really pushed myself into those realms to be successful. And it is overwhelming to stop and think, oh my God, at this age, I've got this event, and to know that you can do an off-site event for 5,000 people out of quite a small shop and get it on site. So I kept building on that, and the opportunity came up in 2004 with the Trippers White Group. And it was through a mutual friend and a contact. They were looking for a head chef at the Art Gallery in New South Wales. And then it was funny, the days of fax. I was at Byron Bay and they faxed me all the menus of what was being done. And I had an interview with Michelle Gaberner and Jody Ringmar. Jody was the venue manager of the Art Gallery and Michelle's GM of Trippers White. And then I was fortunate enough to take on the head chef's job at Trippers. At that time, Brian Trippers had 5 properties. And very quickly after I sort of, took on that role, I was working across their other properties. And that then grew into other opportunities. I stayed with them for 10 years. And by the time we left, we had, 30 or 40 properties. So my role was to help in regards to food concept, anything to do with tenders. I do a presentation and then we'd help set the team up, mobilizations, set the kitchen up, go on site for the first handful of weeks and then retract back. And the luxury that we had there was that, giving the head chefs autonomy and the responsibility to run their venues. My job primarily was to support them. So as long as they met the food brief in each of those locations, we went through the menu planning process and all the processes with a menu tasting and the costings and et cetera, et cetera. If it hit the brief, the chef's got most of their dishes on that menu. Yeah.
And since you have got an opportunity, worked with so many different companies, so many different kitchens. Did you start at a culinary school or it was all these kitchens that you taught what you are?
Yeah, certainly. So the way the apprenticeship worked when I commenced, you could do either block release or day release. So block release was 5 days a week, so full-time at TAFE, but no real restaurant experience. So I opted to go for day release. So I went 1 day a week. And then the other 4 was actually 5 days. I worked in the restaurant. So I worked 5 days in the restaurant. TAFE was considered a day off then. And that's how it worked. And the luxury I had there was I could put into practice what I was learning at TAFE. It was a little bit hard up first with the Chinese restaurant because you learn all the French techniques at TAFE. And here I am using cleavers and God knows what in the Chinese restaurant. So, but once again, it sort of pushed me to aspire to bigger things because technically I was learning 2 cuisines, sort of Chinese cookery and French at TAFE, and I was only going once a week. Yeah. So my other day off, I'd practice at home my lesson plan before I went to TAFE. So I had an understanding of what I was about to do.
Yeah. Since I mentioned that I've stalked you on LinkedIn before, I saw that you had posted a box of knives with a small note on it that your grandpa gave it to you.
Yeah,
so
yes.
That was early in your career or?
Yeah, so when I first started, the government initiatives they weren't around then. And my grandfather bought me a handful of knives secondhand back then to take to TAFE and use because knives back then brand new were, you were a young kid and, by the time you bought your toolbox and your Chef Whites and your neckerchiefs and et cetera, et cetera. He helped me on my way. He had a toolbox made for me and the other day I came across those and still have them. And, you can see the bow in the knife. It's been sharpened that much now. So, but look, and that's what's so good about hospitality is it's all those memories and those people that supported you along the way, family, friends, and, you have them for a lifetime.
Yeah. And in saying that, do you remember any key moment through this journey till becoming that executive chef in Trippus Group?
Yeah, look, I think, every time I stepped up, it was always daunting to, sort of feel, can I do this? Am I capable of doing a sit down dinner for 900? Because there's always a first time, right? So, and there was that, you always get that belly, that nervous feeling in your belly. It's like when you play sport and you get the grand final jitters, and I remember going to work feeling like that and think, oh God, is it nerves? Is it anxiety? Or is it just that, and I've since learnt that they're good feelings to have because it means that you really want it. You want to do the best you can. And, so look, for me, I've enjoyed all that side of it and pushing myself sort of outside my comfort zones at times. But what's really important to me, it's about developing others as well, because it's not always about me, and it's a team effort. It's a collective effort. You look at a sports team, people have their roles and positions for a reason, and they're good at what they do. And for me, it's really important to understand the dynamics of a team as to, if someone's falling down over there, what can we use from that side of the kitchen to pick them up a little bit? And, that's really powerful with people. And when you have that understanding to nurture and help people, the respect that you get it's enormous. Yeah.
And like you have worked in kitchens, like professional kitchens, hotels, fine dinings, even in QSRs and catering. So all of these, although, they cook and serve, but they do definitely have different things, different processes. So what were those?
Yeah, look, it's all variable, from fine dining restaurants to a la carte restaurants to, Trippus White, we were in private schools, you know what I mean? So, and you're always constantly learning. Even one of the portfolios that we had at Trippus White was at Ham and Care, and that was texture modified food. So, people that have swallowing challenges, you're working with speech pathologists, nutritionalists, and food is a very important part of everyone's day, particularly patients. So, making sure they get the most nutritional value out of food and understanding that. Even working with the dietitians at Canberra there at the Institute of Sport, you got athletes coming, globally into that facility, and just sort of understanding the power of food. It's more than just putting something on a plate. There's a science to it. And I never thought, in my entire career that I'd have the appreciation that I do for food, not just what it brings to people, but the power of that through, nutritionally balanced meals, right into the aged care sector. It's quite dynamic in that respect. And, I've been fortunate enough that I have played in a lot of those different fields to have the knowledge and the understanding and also the appreciation of what that offers people.
What did you enjoy the most out of it? Can you rate top 3 for you?
Yeah, look, I think what I love about food is it brings people together. Good, bad, or indifferent. There's always celebrations around food. There's commiserations about food. There's just something about the family meal that's quite humbling. I think it's amazing, whether it's a barbecue in the backyard with your friends, right down to sharing food at the table. There's lots of stories told around food. And even going back to the farmers and the growers and how it got to the table, they're interesting stories to understand and have an appreciation of also. And I just love the richness that it brings to people. Food's about generosity. It comes from the heart. And I just love seeing people having a good time.
Yeah. So you don't have a particular top 3 when it comes?
No, I think it's holistically. It's the whole package.
Right,
do you know what I mean? Like even, I stepped out of the kitchen a handful of years ago professionally.
Yeah.
But I love entertaining. I cook at home all the time because I love it. And I find it, funny enough, relaxing. But, they say you find a job that you enjoy, you will never work a day in your life. Yeah. And I love it. I love food.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, you stepped out of the professional kitchen quite a few years ago and you transitioned your role to a management. So how was the transition for you? What inspired you to take that step? Yeah,
certainly a handful of years ago after COVID sort of finished, the industry was shaken up somewhat. A lot of businesses, could pivot and alternate their offerings. And unfortunately, a lot didn't either. And I took a step back in that moment in time as to, where I was in my career. I've got a young family that I'd like to see grow up. And so, look, I took the decision to sort of step out of that. And I got into sales and I just thought, God, I never saw myself as a salesperson. I could sell you a dish off a menu because,
Yeah.
that was the easy part,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, getting into sales. But I think what's been really fortunate for me is having that passion and desire to know what you're selling is really key. And there's a sense of loyalty that comes with that as well. And, having the connections that I do in industry, it's really important for me to partner with the right brands, the right products. So, that if you are messaging something that you can stand by it or beside it. So look, I started selling cooking oil a couple of years ago. And then the opportunity came up, Squizify, which is digital food safety. Having rolled out, accredited food safety plans for Trippus White, when it was paper-based, the realization of automation, digitization, it's just a massive game changer. And, our industry, as old as it is, that adaptation from moving into the digital world is coming at a rapid rate. And there's still a lot of businesses out there using paper-based models. And once I saw that opportunity, I thought, this is for me. It's perfect. I'm still connected to industry and all those people, keeping everybody safe in live time. And it gives me that balance with family and industry also.
So as your role shifted from being a chef towards like sales, did you learn these management skills in some training school, or again, it was a hands-on experience?
Yeah, look, it's a fabulous question. It's just I never saw myself as a salesperson, to be honest with you. I thought, God, how do people go out and hit these targets every month and be this person, that person? But I think it comes back to being passionate about what you do and believing in what you do. But as I said before, it's really important that I align myself with brands that I feel comfortable that I can promote and sell. Even in the space of digital food safety, the growth that we've seen over the last 2 years in this space has been phenomenal. And, the recognition that we're getting, the word of mouth that's getting out there now is fantastic. Do you know what I mean? And I'd probably learn a few things along the way as well, especially when you get into enterprise agreements and what have you. But it's like anything in life, you learn something new every single day, and it's just something you put in your bag of tools, and there'll be a time and a place to use that. I think relationships are really valuable. Whether it's a sales opportunity or just a networking opportunity, they're really valuable things to have in your top pocket. It's just that relationship skill, because I tend to speak to people more about the industry than I do about the product. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So whether it was the oil business or digital food safety, because of my background and my experiences, we share a lot of those. And 9 times out of 10, a lot of those sessions turn into, oh, what would you do here? Or what would you do there? Do you know what I mean? And I quite enjoy that, because it's also about giving back on your experiences.
Right. And the discipline that you learned as a chef, did it help you in these roles?
Yeah, without a doubt. Like the training with the Europeans, it was pretty straight down the line. Working with Bruno at Peppers on Sea, he was the kind of guy, if you spilt something on your uniform, we had white aprons, from your waist right down to your ankles. If you spilt something on it, you had to go and get changed. So you could be getting changed half a dozen times a day. So you learn to work meticulously clean. And look, there was times when I've done 14-hour shifts and people are like, oh man, like you look incredible. Like you haven't even picked up a knife. But it's just that training that is driven into you, and that precision work, the fine dining experience under Europeans. I loved it. I seriously loved it, because that's a lot of my DNA. It's a lot of who I am. I'm fairly structured in what I do. And I think that put me in really good stead. Some of the behaviors that were sort of thrown around in the kitchen, probably not so, but that was then, this is now.
Yeah.
So that, learn a lot of things what to do and quite a few not to do also.
Right. And I completely missed on asking you this question, but like we were having this chat earlier about how the tech was completely different back then and how it has like meticulously changed over these years. Like, how did you see that impacted a chef's life? I mean, of course, it made it easier, but was it actually easy, or it changed the life of a chef completely?
Yeah, look, there's still some resilience out there when it comes to technology, without a doubt, and that's just about changing the guard. Like technology is coming at us thick and fast. Applied in the right sort of mannerisms, it can work really well. But yeah, look, when I started in the kitchen, God, there's mobile phones where there's no such thing as a mobile phone, and we just had a conversation about roadmaps.
Yeah, right.
It was the Gregory's and off you go. Not put it into Google and happy days. Find out you're 20 minutes from your destination, but you learn to grow with those too. And I think it's really important that we embrace those, because you can get left behind really quickly. Like the technology in ovens now, the automation, robotics. Look, there's a place for it all, but it's just a matter of how we break that down, and it suits what environment you're in regards to those efficiencies. But yeah, it's certainly come a long way, and it's it's not going to stop anytime soon either.
Yeah. And going back to, I think this is something that we all are very proud of, that you have won the World Championship representing Australia. But earlier in the conversation, you mentioned that you participated in the competition quite young. So did that help you when you represented Australia in this competition?
Yeah, for sure. What was really interesting by entering the World Food Championships is that I hadn't competed for 30 years. So really that gap from when I started my career to when I basically ended it, I hadn't competed, but I've done a lot of judging. So you understand the judging criteria of what people are looking for, and having sat on as the national chairman of judges at Food Service Australia for about 12 years, there's a criteria there, and you get to understand fairly succinctly what those requirements are. You still got to cook good food. It's not just about kitchen work. Look, I think that put me in really good stead for overseas. What the biggest challenge was how would my food style fit the American food scene? That was probably something that weighed on my mind heavily. But I just did what, that I thought was right. I didn't realize it was a teams event. So I rocked up solo and went through all the cook-offs solo against teams of 3, made top 10 in the first round in the US, and then came back and took out the final. So on the seafood category, 6 months later, we went back to final table in Bentonville, Arkansas, and we had 3 elimination challenges. So that was against, I think it was another 10 teams. So day 1, I think 5 or 6 of those teams went home. Day 2 was another challenge. Then it was top 3. And then I walked home with the ultimate prize. And then just as recently at the back end of last year, I went back-to-back World Seafood Championships, then headed back to Bentonville again this year in April. And out of those 10, 11 teams, I finished 3rd. So that was enough for me. It was time to hand the baton over and step back and let everyone else enjoy the opportunities that the World Food Championships brings. But, I'm proud to say that I've taken on the international ambassador's role with the team in the US to help all the international competitors. So, it's a nice way to finish sort of, a top 3 finish or a podium finish at the finals of the World Food Championships, 3 world titles, and to be their ambassador it's a nice way to finish.
Of course. I mean, it's incredible to do that. And I think you mentioned that you were like just a team of 1 competing against 3. Like, is there any reason why?
Well, it was all by accident at first. When I first went over to the US and we were allocated our kitchens, I saw all the people there. I was like, my God, where are they all going to go? And then someone said to me, where's your team? And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's just me. So, oh no, you can have teams of 3. We could have teams up to 5 and you can tap in, tap out. But at any one time, there was only allowed 3 people in the kitchen. I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. But, I had my dish, I had my lesson plan, I stuck to it. And I thought, you know what, if I do this solo and I can go all the way, I'll just keep going solo and see how far I can go. And even when we went back for the championships this year, there was a Michelin star chef, there was teams of 3, I finished 3rd. So out of 2 years, 3 world titles and a 3rd position solo, like I'm stoked. And the benchmark is raised, which is fantastic. Could I push it any further? Probably not. Did I have the energy to? No. And it is definitely a teams event. It's not a solo event.
But I'm speechless. I mean, it's so beautiful to even, like, you just competed by yourself through and against Michelin star chefs with a group of 3, and you just went through it. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's determination.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And once I was in the kitchen, I was in the zone and I knew what I had to do and I did the best I could. And, I was thrilled about that. And, it was hard for me because my family stayed behind. So therefore, emotionally, that was hard.
Yeah.
But from a distraction point of view, it needed to be done also because it was just game on. And the thing is, as much as I love my family for the support, I just didn't need the distractions to take me off my game to do the best I could. And, I just feel really humbled to think that this stage of my career that I could hold such titles, on a global scale. Do you know what I mean? And the recognition overseas in the States and here in Australia and all the media opportunities, it's been unbelievable. I'm so thrilled, but also humbled as well. The support, the sponsors, because without the sponsors, it would have been a harder chore, without a doubt.
How did the little John who started at 15 felt that time when it was declared that you are the world food champion?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. My mum said to me when I was 15, when I was starting my apprenticeship, she said, "John, you'll go places." I'm like, "God, Mum, I'm only 15. Like, where do you think I'm going to go? You know what I mean? Like, where is there to go?
Yeah.
Like, this is the mid-'80s, for God's sake." So, yeah, but now, look, Mum and Dad are really proud. And I guess when you look back there, you just never know what opportunities lie ahead. Do you know what I mean? And, without a doubt, there's a lot of hard work that goes into that. It doesn't just arrive on your doorstep. And, it's like anything. You put your mind to something, you can achieve anything. But you've got to be prepared to do all the grafting and all the hard work. You can't moan. Well, we can moan, but it's not going to get you anywhere. And I've been quite thankful that, I've been surrounded by people throughout my career that have helped me, maintain that enthusiasm, that motivation, but more importantly, have the support.
Can you tell us what did you cook? What was a winning dish?
Yeah, certainly. So in the first round over there, I did a prawn and snapper ravioli with a pea puree, smoked salmon caviar as my dish that elevated me into top 10. So I had to do 6 dishes in just over an hour. So that moved me then into the next round. And then in the final round, I did a confit salmon with pickled cucumber and baby beets and squid ink. But what I did is that I used suppliers over there and wholesalers to get the best of what I could. So I wasn't just going to the shops. So I researched for 5 months before I went over all the suppliers, lined them up. They delivered to my hotel. I went and did tours on site with their premises. I hand selected all the vegetables. So there was a lot of legwork involved to get it to where I needed to. The salmon was flown in from Scotland. It was hand farmed. So when I spoke to the judges, I had a story to pitch about my dish and the efforts and lengths I went to put that together on a plate. It wasn't just a piece of salmon with some pickled cucumber. Just understanding the farmers, the growers, the sustainability footprint. And that was sort of round 1. Well, when I took out the first seafood championship. And the next time we went back for seafood last year, the first round was themed. So themed is in we had to use certain product in there, which was, I think it was like a lemon seasoning mix. So
was it the surf and turf?
The surf and turf was at final table.
Okay.
Yes, that was my final round.
Yeah.
So after you win your category, all those category champions then go head to head for the ultimate title of the world food champion.
Okay.
So you're competing against dessert, barbecue, burger, seafood, yada yada. So when we had the elimination challenges at final table, the first round was an amuse-bouche. So I did a compressed watermelon with beef brisket, atchar, pickled onion, soy onion puree, and an onion chul. That moved me into round 2. And round 2 was taste and recreate. So we went to a Mexican restaurant, Yayo's, and Chef Rafael Rios did a barbacoa. We had to recreate without a recipe. So we walked in the next day, 6 teams. We had to recreate that. Then I moved into top 3. And then top 3 was based on Crystal Bridges Museum's food style. And it was a tasting menu. So we had to do courses 3 and 4 off a 5-course tasting menu. So where the surf and turf came into it is that was course 3 on that menu. So I had to do 6 of those. And then I did a seared lamb with spiced carrot puree, heirloom carrots, ducker, and kale for the 4th course. So it was 6 of the surf and turf, 6 of the lamb. And when the judges' scores came out, I think I scored 93 out of 100 across 5 judges. I think second place came in at 82. So, yeah, it was 11, 12 points difference between first and second. And, yeah, came home for the title. So, yeah, it all happened so quickly. And then the very next day I was on a plane coming back home again. So, yeah, it's really surreal. Yeah, it is. It's a big build up.
Yeah.
2 days is pretty intense because you're going to restaurants and what have you. And, the way it's all facilitated and coordinated is fantastic. And then when I got back to the airport, my family were there. They'd done all these little banners, and it was really cool. So it was nice to get home and share it with the family. And you get the prize check, which is a dummy check, and they all wanted to take it into school and show everybody. And so it was great. They're very proud, and I'm pretty honored too.
Speaking of your family, like your journey it's dynamic. It's literally like you had your ways up to the ladder.
Sure.
How did your family be a part of that, and your friends?
Yeah, no, without a doubt. My family's played a really big part in all this. They've been really supportive. The thing is, in hospitality, there's a lot of sacrifices that you do make, and that works on both sides. That for you as personally, as the chef, and also for family, like that they miss out on a lot of things. You're going to a lot of things. Every time I went overseas to compete, I was away for 10 days at a time. So my wife had to look after 3 kids, and, that takes a toll on people. And if I didn't have that support, then, I wouldn't be able to achieve some of the things that I've achieved. So that's, sort of been my backbone to a lot of my success is them. And, when you look at industry friends and colleagues, like, when you're having a rough patch or a rough time, there's certain people that I can reach out to and have conversations with, and and I know they remain confidential, which is good for me, because you sort of need that sounding board amongst friends and industry that that conversation won't go any further. And there are some tough times in industry, and there's no doubt about that. But it's knowing that you've got friends and community around you that you can lean on at toughest times, and they will be there for you. So, I'm quite grateful for that, and to have those friendships and that camaraderie, and and family, and that's hospitality. It is family, and we all share similar stories and pain points and choke points, and so I'm very grateful for my family and the support that they give me all the time.
I think they play a commendable role in what a person becomes a successful person. I think this kind of support that you get from a family, it really matters.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. And like even when I went overseas, they put cards in my luggage and messages, and just from a moral support point of view, it's
little
powerful.
Things. Yeah, those little things. Yeah.
Oh, it's amazing. I loved it.
Any advice or any recommendations for the aspiring chefs who want to participate in the World Food Championship?
Yeah, look, give it a go. You could be the next world food champion. It's, it doesn't discriminate. Everyone has equal opportunity. And I'd like to see a few more internationals, particularly from Australia and New Zealand, really getting into it, because it's lifting off. The prize money first prize is 150,000 US cash. So, if you want to be recognized on a global scale, the opportunity's there. We've just finished the last round of golden ticket entries for the Australian leg. So the World Food Championships kicks off in just under 20 days now over in Indianapolis. But to say that, they can go onto the World Food Championships Australia site. They can register ready for next year, be fortunate enough to gain a golden ticket entry. They've got to win the category though. But look, it's open for anybody and everybody. So home cooks or chefs.
So, is it like a long process to be a part of that competition?
No, not at all. So you'll go through a registration process, and there'll be 2 dates in Melbourne and Sydney that you will be entry dates for you to show up and cook. There is a process prior to, getting a seat in the kitchen, so to speak. But you get notified in due course by the operators of that event.
And this is about the competition, but anyone who is aspiring to become a chef, any advice for them?
Yeah, look, I get asked that question quite a lot. I think what's really important is that you align yourself with a reputable operation, one that's going to look after you. You know, we talk about industry and apprenticeships and, you know, what's the good, the bad and the ugly. But, you know, there's some good operators out there doing it really, really well. And there's probably just as many not so. So I think it's really important as a young person to, you know, align yourself with like-minded others, you know, someone that's got a vested interest just as you do. And even it was a point you raised earlier, having a mentor, having somebody that can help guide you along the way is really powerful. I've spent a few projects in the mentoring space, and they're really valuable lessons. And yeah, they're friendships for life. But when you got young kids and then transitioning from school into workplace, you know, leaving primary school, going into high school is a huge transition because you were the oldest kid.
Yeah.
You're now the youngest. You know, they're now leaving school and they're going to workplace. Right. And that's quite overwhelming for a lot of people. And, you know, hospitality is a tough space. It's tough. And, you know, I think it's really important that young kids can reach out to people that they look up to, you know, as, you know, where it's their shining star or a mentor that can help them on their way. Any challenges that may have, they've got a sounding board to help them outside of their, you know, friend community or family community. And I think that'd be really valuable for young kids to do.
Any culinary schools or institutions that you would personally recommend in Australia?
Yeah, look, I don't sort of lean either way, and there's a lot out there. It's about doing your research and making sure you align yourself with the right people. And, you know, there's fees involved in certain, and some can afford them and others can't. You know, for me, I came up through the TAFE system. I've done okay for myself, you know what I mean? But going back to that, you know, you have to work hard at it. You know, just because I went to TAFE didn't mean all these opportunities happened either. It's, you know, it's what you're prepared to put into it. And, you know, we had some kids that were transitioning from high school into workplace, and we had this girl in the kitchen one day that was top and tailing beans, and she'd been doing it for about 30 minutes. And she said, "Oh, chef, I'm bored." I said, "Well, I'm really sorry to hear that." I said, "Hopefully tomorrow you can do it in 25. And she's like, "What are you talking about? I've got to do it again tomorrow." It's like, yeah. I said, it's like the athlete that goes to the track. They'll do that 100-meter sprint every day to shave 1/100th of a second off their personal best time.
Right.
And working in a kitchen is about improving and continuous improvement day after day. So those beans tomorrow, when you're thinking about that, you've got to put it into context. It's not a race by any stretch, but it's about improving.
Right.
And if you can improve on what you did today, tomorrow, then you're on your way to, you know, working upwards in your role, your responsibilities, and I guess your outlook on things too. We do things for a reason. There's a purpose to that. But I find today the young kids need to understand what that purpose looks like, as opposed to, oh, it's just a job, it's a shitty job. It's like, no, someone's got to do it, and these are the reasons why.
Right. That was a clever metaphor. I mean, I think it's going to stick with me. But like, speaking of trends as well, during COVID-19, like as we were talking about it, like things changed drastically. Ready-to-eat meals, takeaways, the industry that it boomed. So what do you think is gonna like be the next big trend? What's building up? What do you think?
Yeah, look, God, it changes at a rapid rate. You know what I mean? Communal dining's still there. It has been for a long time. I love that style of eating. As you said, the ready-made meals to go. Convenience is huge now. People are time poor. So how they still get nutritional value, you know, when they're on the fly all the time. Yeah, it's quite an interesting space. And even with the technology, you know, Unox ovens, for instance, they brought out the Averio. You know, it's like a hot fridge, so it holds food. You know, so people still getting quality product, and you know, it's a really dynamic space. So it's going to be very interesting to see in the next sort of 3 to 4 years, you know, what does our food map look like? You know, not just from dining in restaurants, but out in the convenience space also, in regards to, you know, how it's developing so rapidly.
Yeah. So wrapping up to our session, some lighthearted questions for you.
Sure.
We all are keen on knowing. So, like, which is that one cuisine that you love to cook?
Oh, wow. I don't really have one cuisine.
You have to
no,
stick
I've
to
got
one.
to stick to one. I like Asian food.
Okay.
Yes.
Because you worked in that Chinese restaurant?
No, I just like the freshness of it and the flavor profiles. They're light, they're not too heavy. But needless to say, I love comfort food too, right? So, but I can only choose one.
Which is your comfort food? Something that you can eat every single day.
Oh, I'm not complicated. Things like spaghetti bolognese.
Yeah.
I love spaghetti bolognese. I just love comfort food or slow cooked meats. Do
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Yeah, I'm not fussy, but I'll eat anything pretty much.
And is there any particular dish that your kids love that you cook?
Oh, the kids love roast dinner. They love roast dinner and barbecues. So yeah, so we mix it up. They love that. Once again, it's all communal dining.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
roast dinner, I'll either put it up on the kitchen bench. Everyone helps themselves. You normally do 2 or 3 proteins.
Yeah.
And a stack of vegetables to go with it, and Yorkshire
Yeah.
puddings, of course, and gravy. But they love it and they talk about it. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So their favorite part of the weekend is when we actually sit down all together and eat.
Do you see any of your kid like growing to become that thing that you have, the legacy that you're
Yeah,
built?
probably not in the kitchen. Like Lily, God, Lily loves sweets. Anything that's sweet, she's all over it like a rash. Like she just loves it. Look, I think what's important for my kids and the family is that they make their own choices and they're
Right.
not influenced by me. All I want to be for them is a really good role model and hopefully take some of those values into their own workspace. The kitchen, if they want to go there, I'll celebrate that and support that. But I won't be pushy about it either.
Right. And lastly, if you weren't a chef, what would your life look like?
Well, funny enough, I had the opportunity when I was younger. I played representative rugby league. So there was an opportunity there.
Yeah.
That didn't come off. But when I started chefing, I wanted to join the Navy, funny enough, but I was too young. So by the time I finished school, I was too young to enlist, hence why I went down the path I did. But if it wasn't cooking, interestingly, I wanted to be a police officer.
Okay.
So, but I'm pretty grateful that I'm not now.
Yeah, you have made like a wonderful chef, leaving such a beautiful legacy behind.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it is exciting.
Yeah, it was great chatting with you, John. And I mean, it was such an honor to have you here, the world champion himself.
No, thank you. It's an honor and a privilege. So really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for watching this episode. It was quite a journey with Chef John and how he started so young to becoming a world food champion. We hope you like this episode. And if you do, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.